The tutor from AthenaStudies, and today I'm going to be taking you guys through the third knowledge clip, which is going to be over the theoretical framework. So let's get started. So for the theoretical framework, I would recommend a range of about 700 to 900 words. And it's okay if you go a bit on the higher end of this. I know I did whenever I was writing. I think I wrote about 900 to 1,000 words for the theoretical framework, but that was what I believed was necessary, and as long as you stay within the overall 3,300 maximum word count that includes the 10% deviation, you'll be fine. So that's just a little note on that. And for an assignment reminder, just so we're all on the same page, again, in your assignment, you are going to be reflecting on the Economist article that they gave you and addressing the question basically, to what extent is having EU passports as a commodity morally legitimate? So your central question probably is a bit more specific than this one that they gave you in the assignment requirements, but again, you should explain why the research question is relevant, address the relevant recent policy, deliberate whether it should be adopted by the government, and then, of course, answer your research question and formulate a new one based on future research. So, for your theoretical framework specifically, the goal is describing the relevant information or literature that helps you answer your central question in your analysis. So again, your central question is the element that you introduced in your introduction, and now you're going to take a step back and look at a bigger picture for your central question that you later will again hone in on in your analysis. So in your theoretical framework, you can include topics and characteristics that are relevant to the specific EU passport issue that you're addressing. So just to note that the theoretical framework is not for you to talk about arguments for or against your central question. So this is not the time for you to analyze whether your policy or solution would be successful or not, or would be morally legitimate or not. This is not the time for that. The theoretical framework is supposed to give a broader perspective on the background behind your central question, and of course introduce criteria that you are going to use to answer your central question in your analysis. So remember, this is about background information and mainly like criteria definitions that you are going to later apply to your specific solution for your central question in the analysis. So another quick note on the theoretical framework is that it should be obviously objective and you should present facts. So again, your opinions and arguments should come in the analysis and conclusion section. This is still unbiased and very, very evidence-based. So I'm going to basically break down the theoretical framework in terms of content and structure kind of at the same time. So there are two main parts of your theoretical framework that I would recommend focusing on. So first is background, and second is introducing your relevant criteria. So at first, I'm going to explain the background. So your theoretical background is mainly descriptive, the what, and explanatory, the why. So in your theoretical background, you can describe relevant topics that you've decided to explore depending on what aspect of the assignment you're focusing on. So if you're focusing on maybe the supply and demand in your central question and how that affects the moral legitimacy of an EU passport market, you can explore information and provide more information about the principles of the free market, so supply, demand, the elasticity, international trade, etc. You can describe international trade, so trade between people from different ethical, cultural backgrounds. If you're exploring more of the difference in ethics between cultures, this could be something that you could be exploring in your theoretical framework. Being able to buy EU passports could increase equality when you're analyzing whether it's like between rich people and poor people. Moral taboos, markets can influence people's morals, and then also markets have different amounts of responsibilities and moral obligations on all levels of business. So how does that apply to a passport commodity market? So these are some relevant topics that were also provided to you in your course outline, but I want to remind you that these are things that you can explore depending on what aspect of the main question that they introduced to you what aspect you are actually focusing on. So obviously you don't need to answer all of these, that would be way too long, but pick or come up with your own. Just provide extra information about the background of your central question. And another note is that you can choose 2 to 3 of these relevant topics to analyze, and it depends on your tutor. Some tutors may want you to only pick 2 or only come up with 2. Some might want 3. It really just depends on what they prefer as well. So again, your relevant topics depend on your central question. If you're not asking that, or you're not thinking of a solution to something dealing with supply and demand, you don't need to explain the relevant topic of supply, demand, and elasticity if it's not relevant to your specific central question. Then we have the relevant criteria, which I'm going to describe. So the relevant criteria is supposed to make clear which criteria should be used to test whether buying an EU passport should be left for each member country to decide on, regulated on the EU level, or banned entirely. There should not be a market at all. So again, your criteria are basically going to be measuring and assessing the effects of unilateral passport market policy, EU passport market policy, or no passport market at all. So again, this really depends on what exactly you're exploring in your central question, but this is basically going to be the way you analyze whether whether a policy, a specific policy, is going to be successful or not. So some ways that you can analyze, or some criteria that you can use to analyze whether or not this policy would be successful or not, is maybe looking at the revenue of individual EU countries, or aggregate EU revenues based from a passport market, the moral values of different EU countries. Maybe they're just way too different, or they're very homogenous, so you could use that as a criteria. Any naturalization processes, so those are the things that people have to do normally in order to gain EU citizenship. So how would those change depending on the market or the market policy? How much tax evasion would be present if or if not there would be a passport market? So these are some examples of criteria that you can use yourself whenever you're analyzing whether a market policy would be successful or not. And another note that I would say is that you can think of your criteria as grading rubric categories. So just like when your tutors are going to grade your writing assignment, they're going to use a few subcategories in order to analyze whether or not your essay is good, or your essay was successful or not. So some different categories are like content, structure, your referencing, overall flow, like things like that. So this is kind of similar to your own criteria that you're introducing in your writing assignment. So it's kind of like these categories or concepts that are going to serve you as measures to get you to your answer in your analysis. So in your theoretical framework, you're introducing and you're defining these criteria, and then in your analysis, you're applying this criteria to your policy specifically. Then another note about relevant criteria is that, again, it should make clear which criteria should be used, and to find your criteria, you can look through your literature for common themes. So, for example, do academic articles continuously and consistently reference naturalization processes or tax evasion when they're considering the moral legitimacy of an EU passport market? Things like that. So, if you look through a few articles and you take notes in those articles, tax evasion is a very hot topic in each of these articles, or the amount of revenue that an EU country would be gaining or losing by implementing an EU passport market. How much does it increase or decrease? What is the change? Things like that are consistently referenced across a lot of literature, or you find interesting across a lot of literature, you can use as a criteria. So what I would recommend you do in order to organize that is just to make a list of literature per common criterion to help you organize. So if you see, after looking at maybe 2 to 3 articles, that naturalization processes is a big concern when deciding whether or not buying an EU passport is morally legitimate, then you can basically put that on like a document or something and then reference those specific articles that you found naturalization processes as a topic in. So that way you can keep track of which articles apply when you're trying to define your criterion for naturalization processes. And this is just an example. So that's a way that you can organize the different criteria. And a quick note on this is that you can come up with maybe like 4 to 6 criteria as first, just initially based on, what you're seeing with a few articles or something, and then you can narrow it down to have 3 or 4 very strong criteria with lots of evidence based on your preference or just based on how much literature there is about that criterion. So at first you can come up with more and then narrow it down to have 3 to 4. And again, you need to be able to explain these criteria in depth with lots of evidence. You need to make sure that you define it well, because once you define it and introduce it in your theoretical framework, you're going to be applying these criteria in your analysis. So that's why they're very important. And before I finish up this video, I'm actually going to show you guys an example of my own essay where basically I had to do the exact same thing. This is for taxation, so of course like the content's going to be different, but the general structure and ideas are the same. So at first in my theoretical framework, mine is about digital service taxes and whether we should implement short and long-term solutions. So that's what I was exploring. So these probably first, I believe, 3 paragraphs are just providing background. So for me, I went chronologically because that was the most effective for my content or my information. So basically, I was talking about solutions that have been done in the past for digital service taxes, what problems are persisting, like what has the European Commission done to mediate these problems. Are they discussing more solutions? Like, these are the things that I was basically talking about in the background section of my theoretical framework. And then from there, once I provided the setting of my issue, then I went specifically into the criteria. So this is where I start introducing that there are several criteria that can influence the decision to implement in short and long-term solutions. So this is where I'm basically going to explain criteria that should be used to evaluate whether or not a short and long-term solution would be effective or not, or to what extent it would be effective. So I introduced, this is my first criterion that I describe for this whole paragraph, my second criterion that I describe, lots of evidence as you can see, my third criterion that I describe, and then my fourth one. So for me, I found that 4 criteria was the best for my essay personally, but of course it will be different, depending on what your central question is, whether you can sufficiently support with evidence your criterion. So it really just depends. But again, this is kind of just what works for me. So I think it's good to show an example. But that's going to basically finish up this video. Thank you guys again so much for watching. Let me know in the comment section what you would like to see next, and check the description box for a few links to these slides, links to the Moral Limits writing assignment playlist, and also just an additional link talking about literature search. So again, let me know if I should make videos about the analysis conclusion and some extra tips for you guys before, next week, I think, when your assignment is due. So again, thank you guys so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.